All right, I'll reiterate for the benefit of the recording. We're going to cover classes one more time in depth. Probably be this last full-time lecture on classes. So what I want to do is I want to create a class that I'm going to be able to do something like this. Let's go ahead and define a main. And that's going to be where all of our code is. I'm just going to put a comment here. And then down at the bottom, let's do that actually awesome stuff that we're supposed to be doing. If underscore underscore, two underscores, name underscore underscore equals quote, two more underscores, main underscore underscore quote colon, then call main. Now why am I bothering to do that when I don't always do that? Because I may make a class so awesome that I want to use it again with a simple import statement. And you pretty much have to code this in this style if you're ever going to write your program in such a way that it can be imported into something else. Otherwise, it would just run all the code in it, right? And we don't want code that auto runs just because we did an import. All right, so here's what I wanted to do. And obviously, it's not going to work yet. I want to be able to say this. GL is equal to glob and give it a file name. Data.txt, something like that. Better would be if we asked the user for the file name, right? But when we have to run these programs 30 times in a row, it gets really annoying, having to type in something every time we run something. So you can always get something to work, and then you can make it better, right? So what we're going to do is then we're going to call, gl.process. It's going to process the file, whatever that means. Who knows what it means? We'll figure out what it means. And in g1.print, it's going to print the results. It'd be even neater, and this is kind of a stretch goal, if we could make it do this, print G1 and have it print out all the information in the glob in whatever format, that we specify. If we don't do anything special, then all this is going to do is print out some kind of memory address or something like that. And it's going to be ugly. But if we're cool and awesome, we'll be able to write our class in such a way that this will actually print some good data. Just like when you print a list, when you do print, parentheses, capital L or whatever, it actually makes a nice looking output, right? It puts, square braces around it, and it puts a series of things separated by commas. And that's because they made the list class have a way of converting itself into a nice little string. And if they hadn't done that, then every time you wanted to print it, you'd have to write your own for loop. Okay, so that's what we wanted to do. Obviously, none of this is going to work yet. I'm going to comment out this stuff because we're going to do it incrementally, right? I just want to do that first. And so what is glob going to do? We're going to pass it a file name, and it's going to try to open that file. Oh, and one more thing. Maybe we want to do this. If gl.ok, right? If the glob is good. We could even make it where you didn't have to put the parentheses after it, but that kind of starts looking weird, right? So we'll make it where you have to put the parentheses after it. So once you do that, and I'll fix the tabbing and this stuff over it later. Okay, I want to define a class called glob that does that. Class glob, going to be our glob of data. We're going to have to create that data file. Why don't we do that right now? It's just going to be a series of numbers. Like that. That's enough. I'm going to save it. Need to save it into my favorite fun directory, scripting. I think I'm going to call it data.txt, but I'm going to have to change the save as type to .txt to accomplish that. And yeah, I have a data from a previous. If you feel like picking a different name, then save it as a different name and modify your code to match. All right, so that's my data file. I'm probably going to close it. I don't think I'm going to need it again. As soon as I say that, I'll change my mind, but I can always open it again. Okay, so we need to make an init method. And a method is just a function that's attached, that's part of a class. So 2 underscores. I know you know that by now. And we're going to take a file name. But the first parameter of a method has to be what?
Self.
Yeah, self. And then we can throw the file name in. And are we going to make a default file name? I don't see why. Let's require the programmer who uses our class to always have to specify a file. So I'm not going to do an equals quote here, right? All righty, we're going to try to open that file. File equals open. We're going to open it for reading. So file name, comma, R. And let's just make it print. Okay, and I've already made another mistake. I'm not going to fix it yet. How about print file name, comma, quote, opened, just so that we can see it worked. So I need to save this, and I have no idea what lecture we're on. We on T? Did I hear somebody tell me?
No, not T. V.
P?
V.
V. V. Okay, V is in vehicle. All right, cool. So lecture V. All righty. Now I have made a mistake here, and I want to see if anybody spots it. The mistake is right here. When I run it, it's going to tell me the file name is not defined.
You have to put the self dot.
Oh, you're right. But I actually do have it correct. This will work, but the problem is that the file name won't be saved. What I need to do is to save my file name in a self variable. So here I'm going to do self.filename equals file name. That just saves it so that later on, if I need it in another method in the class, I'll have it. And at this point, it doesn't matter whether I just open file name and it uses the parameter, or I change these to self.filename, because right now they're going to be the same thing, right? But why not? Why not do that? So I'm going to come over here and do self.filename there. And I'm going to do self.filename there as well. And I always like putting too many spaces in my print statements. All right. Let's see if it works. Data.txt opened. What if I give it a bad file name? And it blows up. What can I do to fix that? How should I handle an error, stop it from killing the program? We've done that for the inputs and the conversions and stuff like that. What did we do? Yeah, we're going to use a try and an except. So how's about here we do try, colon. But if there's a problem, oh wait, and if we get the file open, let's set an OK variable equal to true so we can always see if it worked or not, right? So We could save the opening of this until the call to process, but I think we ought to try to open it as soon as we try to create our glob. So anyways, here's what we're going to do. If it worked, self.ok is equal to Now, I'm not sure if that's going to conflict with that one. We'll fix that when we get down here. We're not going to write that method yet. All right, but if there's a problem, then it failed, and we're going to print an error message. And then we're going to set self.ok equal to false. So print, I took away the quote, self.filename, end quote, comma, not opened, or not found, something like that. And so we print that it's not found. We print our error message. And we set self-OK equal to false. Let's run it. Since I have a bad file name, I'm expecting to see the last thing. That not found. Maybe I should put the word file in front of it, right? File, whatever, not found. So I'm going to come up here and say, quote, file, end quote, comma, not found. I think that'll look better. Tells us the exact error. I'm going to change this back. All right, since I have a variable called OK, I don't necessarily need to make this a function. I could just do that. But what if I like functions? Functions look cool. I would either need to change the name of this, I believe. Let's find out. What I'm going to do here is hopefully this works. And by the way, wave your hand if you need me to stop. Print gl dot OK, parentheses, end parentheses, that. And what I want is for that to print true or false. And so I want to add a method up here because it's a function call that will return self.ok. But I'm wondering if there's going to be a name conflict, and let's find out. So, only indent one level now because we're defining a new function. def OK colon. And then return self.ok. Now I totally botched that definition. It's distracted. What should I put after the OK? This is supposed to be a method, right? It's supposed to be a function call. So, yeah, I need parentheses. And I need my self parameter. Yep. All right. Like I said, I'm not sure whether this and this are going to conflict or not. Not sure it's going to work the way I want it to. Yeah. Okay. It did. So what am I going to do? Maybe I change the name of this to like fail and then return the opposite, right? Or I just change the name of the OK variable. How about changing the name of our variable? How about is OK? And so I'm going to change all the .OKs to is OK. I had to change it in 3 places. Alrighty, data.txt opened, and since it was opened successfully, okay, return true. Well, alrighty. I'm going to change the name of the file name again to make sure that it handles bad file names. I want to see it print false when I call OK. And it did. Alrighty. I'm going to change this back to a good file name now, obviously. Alrighty. Anybody need help or need me to slow down? All right. Let me come help. Alrighty. Things to watch out for is it's real easy to make your code look like this, right? Where the try and the except lined up with the DEF. But then this stuff is not part of that function. So just got to make sure that we have it tabbed over one. Alrighty. Now it's still not doing this process and this print stuff. But come down here and uncomment out that print.gl. And when I run it, it's going to print something that, yeah, wait, it's not really, okay, I accidentally made that G1. My mistake. You should never use lowercase l's if they can be confused with ones or vice versa. There, that one bit me. Alright. Okay, and so I don't want it to print that if I try to print it. I want it to print something useful. Not sure what, but I sure want it to print something useful. So what I need to do is I need to provide what's known as a string method. In the Java language, it's called toString. The string method is supposed to take some data out of the class and return it in a nice format, easy to be printed. And so here, we're going to give it a silly one at first. def underscore underscore str underscore underscore. Notice the fancy underscores. Parentheses self, in parentheses colon, and return, quote, ha ha ha, I am a glob. Obviously, we're going to fix that. I just want to see it print that first. Make sure that it's working before I, get more ambitious. And there we go. See, it printed out something much better because I added a string method to my class. Are there other fancy methods I could add besides str? Well, we can find out. Let's do a dir of our glob class to find out what it supports. So print, parentheses, dir, parentheses, glob, or maybe just gl. Not G1, like I almost just typed again, and then two close parentheses. This should give us a list of all the functions that are part of our class, all the methods that are part of our class. And we're going to see a whole bunch of things. And hey, we didn't provide those, but that's because Python provides us with a whole bunch of functions already by default. But then we could change them, just like we did the str function. All right, so here's all the different functions. We wrote our own init. We wrote one called isOK, or OK, somewhere it should be there. We have a variable called filename, that's true. We have a variable called isOK. We have a function called OK. Here's one called string. I don't have any idea why I would replace their size of function that comes by default with it with one for our own. I'm not seeing much that I think I would want to replace, except perhaps equal. And I'll tell you what that does. We could write this. If you define two classes, and be careful on how I say this. If I go down here and I say G2, now I am going to a number, is equal to G1. And then if I print parentheses G2 equals G1, it's going to print true. That is true, right? They're the same thing. But what if I do this? G2 is equal to glob, and you don't have to do this. I'm probably going to delete it all real fast. Glob data.txt. We might want that to say that they're the same thing, right? They both have the same file name. Hopefully they have the same data. We might want that to say that it's true, but it's not going to say that it's true. By default, if you compare two reference variables, two objects with equal, all it does is check to see if they're the same object. And so when we did G2 is equal to G1, they were the same object. Just like you have two street signs pointing to the same street, you don't have two streets just because you have two street signs. You know, and we had two variables pointing to the same object when I had it like that. And so that would make that true. But if I do this, then I may want that to be true, but at this point it's going to say it's false because they're not pointing to the same object. The two street signs are no longer pointing to the same street. Now what if the streets are identical? What if they have the exact same houses on them and stuff like that? Maybe I want it to say true. So I could override that method. I could write an underscore EQ underscore method. All right. And there I typed a 1 again. All right, I'm going to delete all that. This part for now. I don't think I need the directory of it anymore. So I think I'm just going to comment that out right now as well. That's my current state of my project. Doesn't do anything yet. It doesn't call gl.process. And then it doesn't call gl.print. Let's go and add those methods, even if they don't do anything. This is called creating stubs. Stubs are functions or methods that don't do anything useful. You just write them so that you can go and complete main, and then you go in and fill them in later. Kind of like you're drawing lines that you're later, are going to go and paint. And so you draw your duck, and then later you come back and you paint the duck. So anyways, def process parentheses self, because that's the name of our first function. And right now all it's got to do is print a silly message. I better process. And how about another one? Def print parentheses self end colon. Print. Let's print. I wonder what would happen if I said print self. I wonder if that would look cool. I wonder if it would work. Now I'm going to uncomment out these two things. Run it. G1 not defined. I did that over and over and over. GL. I got them all now. All right. Okay. So the print function actually worked. These two things do the same exact thing. Does that mean that one of them is useless? Maybe that means the print function is useless because, it's just as easy to print it that way. I think it maybe is. So maybe I'm just going to delete that and delete that method. Right. Why make the class more complicated? If I come up with a different reason, if I come up with some fancy way that it's supposed to print, I can probably think of a reason. But for now, I'm going to leave it alone. Okay. So what is process going to do? It's going to read through the file, getting all the numbers, summing them up, and maybe calculating an average as well. So process is going to have one of those loops that steps through the file, reading in a line of data, stripping the line of data, splitting it into a list, and then stepping through the list, adding all the numbers together. Sounds like a lot, but it's not really. And we've done this before. So I may not explain every single step of the way. But we definitely are going to need a variable that contains our total. So Why don't we come up here to init and add a new variable called total. So self.total equals 0. Why am I putting that there? So that if we try to print out self.total before we call process, it's not going to generate an error. It's just going to print 0. And I think that's reasonable, right? If we haven't processed it, we don't know what the total is yet, but I don't want it to blow up with a red error message. Okay, but every time we call process, let's rewind the file. Oh, look at that. Here's another mistake. I opened the file there, but since I didn't make this a instance variable, since I didn't make it self.file, there's no way to get a hold of that file down here, right? If I do this, if I do 4x, don't type this, 4x and file, blah, 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 it doesn't know what file is because since I didn't put self.dot in front of it, it wasn't saved. It was just a local variable that disappeared as soon as the function was left. So, up here, where it says file equals, we got to make that self.dot as well. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can use the same variable down inside of another method. If you don't need to share variables between methods, don't bother putting self.dot in front of it. Okay. So some cleanup. Every time we call process, we want to rewind the file to the top, and we want to reset the total back to 0 before we start processing it. So how about self.file.rewind, and then total self.total equals 0. And now we can use a for loop. We're going to step through our file line by line, getting all the data out. We probably need a counter too to indicate how many items of data we have, unless we're going to store all of this in a list. That might not be a bad idea. Let's make a list that's got our data in it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to keep the data for now. We could write this. What I'm waffling over is what are we going to do as we're reading the file? Are we going to read the file in, storing everything into a list, and then step through the list and add, calculate the sum and the average? Or are we just going to calculate the sum and the average as we read the file, but then, we don't have a list of the data, we don't know what it was, we can't do anything else with it later? I guess creating the list is the best thing to do. So yet again, I'm going to have to create another variable. Up here, self.data is equal to empty list. And I better start putting some comments here. Will be the sum of the file. Will be the elements numbers in the file, or read from the file. I'm going to change my comment style. Just, you don't have to do this because your fonts are smaller than mine, right? All right. Alrighty, now when we're resetting ourselves before our loop, we're going to rewind to the top of the file, we're going to initialize total to 0, and we're going to set that list equal to 0. Because what if we call process 2 times in a row? Don't really want to process, and just wind up doubling our sum each time we call it, and adding more items to our total each time we call it. And maybe the process method is becoming too complicated. Maybe we should have one method that reads the data in, and then the other one that calculates the stuff. I think for now I'm just going to write it all as one, but then if we think about it, we decide that we ought to split it up into 2 methods. you know, a read method and then a calculate method, then we can do that. Okay, so we've initialized. We need one more. Thinking ahead, what do I want? Up here, I want a counter of all the numbers in the file, so I know how many numbers are in the file. Although I could just, you know, get the number of items in the list, right? I could just use len parentheses list to get the number of items. So maybe we don't really need the counter. But I am going to want not only the total, I am going to want the average as well. So self.avg, short for average, is equal to 0. Average of the numbers in the file. So right now we have 3 variables that the process method is going to fill in. I hope this isn't getting too esoteric, but what we're doing is we're putting a lot of complexity in the class so that when we use the code, it looks real simple. It just looks like that. Okay, so up here, I said I had 3 variables. That's 1, that's 2. What's my other variable? I've already forgotten what it was going to be. Oh yeah, average. Self.avg is equal to 0. We just said, I don't think we need that because we're going to set it later to something else. We're going to assign it to something else, but I'll just leave that there for now. Okay. How do we write a for loop that reads stuff from a file? For line in file colon. Tell you what, for now let's just print the line. Well, let's strip the line and then print it. Line equals line dot strip. And then if len line is greater than 0 colon, we're going to print the line. That's enough to test to make sure that everything we've got going on is working, right? We're not adding things to a list. We're not summing the things up, but it's enough. And what do you know? Object has no attribute rewind. I think it's seek 0, actually. Let me change that. And then if that's not it, I just changed that line. If that's not it, no. For line and file. What have I done wrong there? The problem is in this line of code. It needs to be self.file. Takes a little bit of discipline and habit to start writing these classes. I'm too used to Java and C++ where you don't have to prefix everything. You can. You could always put this dot. Okay. Now why didn't I do this dot line? Excuse me, self.line, right? I could, but the reason I didn't is because this variable is only going to be useful during the processing of it. It's just like a local variable in a function. I don't care what it's equal to after the function is done. If I did care, then I would make it self.line. Excuse me. Alrighty. Hopefully there's no more syntax errors. Alrighty, and so it printed out the numbers in the file as it processed it. That's a good point to make. How are we doing, y'all? Need help? Alright. So the common errors I saw were invalid indentation levels, you know, accidentally leaving like stuff indented 2 over rather than 1. And I probably didn't yell it out enough. My dot rewind was actually an error, syntax error, and I had to replace it with self.file.seek. So just make sure you got that.
What does that do?
Seek is like, you know, when you're seeking to the first track of your CD or seeking to the last track of the CD. Seek just tells it to go to the beginning of the file. Now, why do I need to do that? I'm already at the beginning of the file. What if I call process again? I would be at the end of the file. There wouldn't be any more data.
Oh, it doesn't automatically. Okay.
Right.
Like
So
it's VHS, not a DVD.
right. So it's gonna yeah, exactly. So it's gonna go back to the top. Now what I could do is just open the file every time, and then close it when I was done, and that would probably actually be a smarter thing to do. But for now, I'm going to do the .c. Okay, so let's do something a little bit better than just printing the line out. Let's split it and add it to our data. So let's do L equals line.split parentheses quote space quote. Why am I putting the space there? Because that's how I want it split. I want it split on the spaces. And then L plus, self.data plus equals L. We're going to append this to the end of the list. Actually, that's not true. We're adding it to the end of the list. There's a difference between appending an item to the list and adding to the list. Appending would make this entire list. I'm going to get into that later. What this does is it takes one list and it adds it to the end of the other list. Joins them together, concatenates them. So
you won't have a list inside of a list?
Exactly. I'm trying to avoid sticking a list inside of a list.
I've been doing it the other way forever.
Yep. And we could handle it, if we had lists inside a list. We could make our code handle it, but let's not. Okay. By the time we get here, we're done with the file. Let's just print our data out for now, and then we'll get fancier still. I'm going to take this print statement out here, right? That's going to be kind of noisy. I don't need that anymore. Maybe I'll even delete it. But I'm leaving that one in. All right, and there's the numbers that are in our file. Ripe for being processed. I've decided that I want to rename this one read. And then I want another one called process that actually steps through the data. So we're going to rename this function read. And we're going to write another one that steps through the list. I just think that having one that reads in the entire file and does all the adding and stuff like that may be too much. By the time your function gets to be more than like a screen full, it's about time to split them up into two functions. Okay, so here we go. DEF process parentheses self in parentheses colon. Now we need our loop that's going to this self.total and this self.average probably ought to be put down here in process. I'm going to copy self.total, delete it, and paste it here. And if you don't know how I'm copying and pasting so fast, what I do is I move my cursor to the beginning of the line, and then I hold the Shift key and the down cursor, and that highlights the entire line. And then I hit Control X to copy and Control V to paste. All right. The reason I'm moving these there is just like I mentioned before. I don't want it to double up our totals just because we happen to call process twice. So we're going to reset those values to 0 before we write our loop that processes our list. Now I've got a problem. Our data is in the form of strings. I'm going to need to convert them to ints or floats. I think I'm going to do that with list comprehension. Why don't I just make up a new list? List equals square brackets float parentheses v for v in self.data. So for every value in our data list, convert it to a float and then add it to the end of the L list. So L now contains our numbers. We have to do this to convert from strings. Convert our list of strings to a list of numbers. Now we just use a for loop. For value in L colon self.total plus equals value. You know what? Why don't we just use the built-in function? Self.total equals sum of L. If I reinvent the wheel. And then self.avg equals the sum of L divided by len of L. I think that's enough. I think that's enough for the process method. But I've got a problem down here. What am I going to need to put down here before gl.process?
gl.read.
Right, if we don't have gl.read here, then it's not going to be able to process anything. Our list is going to be empty. So gl.read, gl.process, and then print gl. We're going to have to make print gl more interesting, right? It's going to need to print out the sum and the average and maybe the list of data. All right, seemed to work. I think it's too noisy. I don't think that it needs to print these things out. I will probably comment out those print statements after a while. Everybody got it so you can run it? Okay, so one last thing. I'm going to come back up here and the string function that's supposed to do something cool. Right now all it does is return haha I am a blob. I'm going to make a new string so I can return it. Boring name, S. And so S is equal to, or S plus equals glob data, come on, \n, end quote. S plus equals what is the name of our data list? Self.data plus a quote \n. And then S plus equals quote average colon space end quote plus the string version of our number str in parentheses. We could probably come up with a cleaner way of doing this. Self.average like that. And then just copy that line and paste it and replace those words. Oh, it's not self.average. It's just supposed to be self.avg. My mistake. I forgot my own variable name. And then copy that and change this to total and then self.total. And then lastly, this line needs to be returned S. So you see what we're doing here? We're building up useful information about our glob so that if we try to print it out, I'm sure it's going to print a lot of information if the file is long, but that's okay. Just conceptually, we're building good information. And so when we try to print that string out, we're going to find out that it's a glob, that it's got some data, and that it's got an average, and that it's got a total. Ooh, and it blew up. Can only concatenate a list to a list. I probably need to do that str thing here too. That's my guess as to what's going wrong. So let's give that a shot. str, parentheses, self.data in parentheses. People give up on me? I hear people not typing. Alrighty. And then what did I forget here? I want to put a backslash in at the end of this one too. So plus quote backslash in. Alrighty. There it is. We printed out our glob data, or we printed out our glob and its data and its average and its total. I think I'm going to move the word data down here, right? It'll say data colon and then it'll be followed by the list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the word data here and I'm going to add the word data here, data colon space end quote plus str dot self data. All right, now we got a good representation of it that we can access anytime we want. All right, I'm happy with it. I'm going to make it not actually print those numbers out. I think that's noisy. These words, I'd better process is annoying. Printing true is annoying. So I'm going to remove or modify the annoying stuff. Somewhere we print the list. Right here. You see print self.data at the bottom of read? Get rid of that. We don't want to print our data until we really try to print it. That was one. The thing that says I'd better process is stupid. So why don't we just say reading data? And maybe even print the file name. So the first line of my read method is now going to say print reading data space end quote plus self.file name. All right, do I have more annoying stuff? Let's find out. Oh, I still need to get rid of that. Maybe I should get rid of the word glob there, or maybe I should put the word glob in front of all these things. Maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe I'll put the word glob in front of all those three things, and maybe I'll delete the word true there. And maybe we'll add one more print statement that says processing data. So first change, now print quote processing data. Then I'm going to go down here and where we print out gl.ok, that's dumb. So I'm going to get rid of that. Or I'll comment it out. It's easier for you to follow what I just did if I comment something out. Now honestly, we should only read it and process it and print it if it is okay. So we got to fix that. Because if the read failed, then these things are going to blow up. So how's about if gl.ok parentheses in parentheses colon and then tab the rest of this stuff over like that. Delete that. Delete that. That's what my main now looks like. It's 4 lines of code, 3 of them are indented under the, oh, excuse me, it's 5 lines of code, 3 of them are indented under the if glok. Now does it look nice and clean when I run it? Oh, I forgot I wanted to go and add the word glob in front of the data and the average and the total and remove it from that. That'll be the absolute last change and then we're done with it. So back up to the str function. I should have asked you where I was going to have to make that change, but okay. Get rid of that. We don't need to add the word glob there when we can put it here. glob space data, glob space average, and glob space total. All right. I'm quite happy with it now. Maybe it shouldn't print anything when we read the file or we process the data, right? We could go and comment out those print statements if we wanted to. All right, now I will mention something here, which is that we have written some functions that rely on them to be called in the proper order. And in a computer science world, entangling your functions like that is not necessarily a great thing, right? If we call process before we call read, it's not going to work. We would need to call these in the reverse order, you know. It's mandatory. If we call process without calling read first, then it's not going to work. But I don't see a way around that. Sometimes you have to force one thing to happen before you do the other. All right, I'm going to stop, do walkabout, make sure it's okay. Let's make a Dropbox for this.